tonight's special meeting to convene as Finance Committee of the Whole for the purpose of the presentation from the RCSD District Superintendent Dr. Myers-Smalls and the East EPO Superintendent Dr. Sean Nelms will be presenting their 22-23 budget overview. For those who are not familiar with the process tonight, we currently have no speakers or comments that were submitted. Tonight's presentation, we're going to start with East EPO Superintendent, and then we'll move over to the District Superintendent's budget presentation. And just as a reminder for the process and for those listening and watching in, we will not be taking questions tonight from, excuse me, myself or any other commissioners today. Questions can be submitted to the board question log or saved for the budget deliberations, where we do go in more in-depth section by section or area by area. Tonight, the entire board should be presented by the end of these presentations with a board budget book, so a copy of the budget for you all to take home and start reviewing. And with that, I am going to start with East and have Dr. Sean Nelms present the East EPO's budget presentation for the year 22-23.
How was that? Yeah. Perfect. All right. So good evening. Press the button. All right. Press the button. Good evening, Rochester community and the school board. I'm going to present the budget for the East EPO. Next slide. The East EPO was created several years ago, and in July 1st of 2020, we were approved for a 5-year extension that would take us through July 1 of 2025. The budget was designed in a way that allow us to have long-term considerations in our fiscal planning, and also to be able to be flexible and fluid within our budget to address the academic needs of our students, but also the operational strategies that we have for fully implementing the EPO. In the past, I want to remind the board that the EPO has reduced its budget at times in which there were financial issues within our community. And as recent as last year, when we reduced the budget by almost 20%, at that time, I explained to the community and the board that those type of reductions were not sustainable to the model. We had decided to pause some of our professional development and to pause some of our services. COVID made that a little bit easier because we were virtual, so we were able to do some of our work at a lower cost. But moving into the 22-23 school year, we expect to fully reestablish and restore our programs and initiatives, especially since we have, like most schools, a new student population that we have not been able to do the type of granular work that was done in years prior. Next slide. This slide is just an illustration for, as a reminder to board members who have been here for a while, but something new to our newer board members. Each of our years, we have reduced our budget. The more successful we become, we've had a less reliant on additional staff and services. So you see savings as a result of program efficiencies. You'll see savings as a result of improved graduation rates. You'll also see savings as students perform better academically. Some of the narrow margins and the less savings that you see is due to contractual costs. So every time there is a contract that's negotiated, or teachers get their natural, or staff get their natural pay increases, you know, it definitely impacts the bottom line. And we see that at East as well. So you'll see in 2015-16, when our budget was about $22 million, you'll see that, you know, we were able to give back more. And you'll see that number become less and less. In fact, our budget that will be proposed tonight is actually less than our first year of the EPO. So imagine 7 years of growth, 7 years of employee pay increases and benefit increases. We've still been able to manage beneath the original proposed budget. Next slide, please. This is just a reminder to the community what the purpose of the EPO was. It was designed through a partnership with the State Education Department, the University of Rochester, and the school district out of need. At the time, the school was in dire straits, and we as a community had to make some decisions on who was going to govern that school. At the time, we were considered an out-of-time school. That's legislation that provides an opportunity for the school to be insulated to focus on school improvement efforts. And for East, the out-of-time school became similar to receivership model, meaning that our budget is managed by the receiver. In this case, the receiver is the University of Rochester. And it was designed to be insulated so that issues outside of our control won't impact our programs and services. And the same holds true for the district. The problems we may have at East should not impact the bottom line for the district. So we, in essence, have to manage within our own budget and to not exceed that. And just to reiterate, we haven't done that. In fact, we've been cost savings and return of investment has been in the positive. We also are privy to some of the grant funds that you'll see in the district as well. For example, the American Rescue Plan funds. And for us, we're using those funds to better align our work with the school district and other school districts around this area. We're going to be able to share some of the opportunities and learnings and lessons that we've learned at East, but also an opportunity to learn from other systems as well. And so we did not put money into staffing for ARP. It's important that we focus on things that are time-bound. Knowing that we have only 3 years left, we didn't want to create any permanent structures that would financially impede our progress. Next slide, please. The approved budget for East, again, back to the last year, is $22 million and a little over $22 million. That's the budget I have to work within, including the pay increases, including different services, even the potential of growing out new students. And so for this upcoming year's budget, we are proposing a reduction of at least 2% or 1.8%. That number could increase as we become more efficient. It's important to note, and this is important for the board to understand, that our budget accounts for $1.6 million in grant funding. A lot of that is a title funds. When you look at the East budget, our budget has all of our numbers baked in. And so what we have discussed in the past is that if there are grant funds that are assigned centrally and then allocated to schools, it may not show up in their per pupil amount. So if we're going to compare per pupil costs and we're going to compare school costs, we have to make sure that the grant funds are also in there. Like if I were to take those grant funds out and kind of put them in a central bucket, the return into the district in terms of our budget would be closer to 9%. If you take that 1.6 million out and you add it to the 404 or $2 million. And so I just want to make sure that when we're having these deliberations that we are comparing apples to apples with the budgets, knowing that everything that we have at East is within our budget lines. You'll also note within the budget book a huge increase, or I would say a huge increase or significant increase in a line within the administrative costs. And I want to explain what that is. I created a professional learning line within my budget. I just took from other parts within the school, upper and lower school, my own budget, and kind of consolidated it. So this is not new money. This will allow me to better track the impact of our professional learning. These funds are intended to focus on the targeted work of curriculum development, instructional practices, and assessment. And those dollars were dispersed throughout the school. And I want to make sure for at least the next 3 years that we have a better tracking mechanism for that, so I can be very specific and strategic in explaining to this board and the community what the return of investment is from some of the curricular work that we've been doing for the last 7 years. This budget will focus, we refocus our energy on our systems and structures, and I have those things listed below. As you know, we have a heavily resourced freshman academy. Some of the research out of the University of Chicago makes it clear that if students don't make it past 9th grade with the right credits, with adequate attendance, with the proper supports, that those students are more likely to not be successful. I would say that that's one of the structures that we have relied on to re-engage lower school kids or middle school kids who may have been academically unsuccessful, but also catching up our high school students in ways that allow them to graduate. And we've seen our graduation rate increase as a result of it. Just a reminder to the community, when we began this project at East, the graduation rate was 29%. And as of last year, the graduation rate was 86%. So we are quite confident that what you're reading within those bullets is direct impact of the strategic nature of this work, as well as our ability to think long range in terms of our budget spending and how we allocate those funds. The next slide is just an indication of how the long range planning takes place. This is our special education budget. We work closely with the Department of Special Ed here at the district to try to grow out our special ed models. And I think this illustrates some of the intentionality of our work. As you grow out the number of students, you have to account for their impact on some of the other courses, particularly some of the electives. And so we've budgeted in strategically what we think it may cost to educate additional students at East. At some point, this number may exceed our total budget, then we're going to have to make some strategic plans like any other school district would. So all of our decisions are forecasted out, and it's just one example of how we're being very strategic and intentional about the allocation of funds to grow out and have sustained and improved programs and services. The next slide is just an extension of the previous one in terms of what this budget will not significantly impact. We know we're going to have to reduce some of our budget, but we're going to make sure that the East model returns to what it was and what it was created to do. And this is just a list of some of the academic inputs that we hope to share with the larger community through the use of ARP funds, but also through some of our budget-based funds as well. And the list here is not all-inclusive, but it gives you an idea of some of the leading indicators that have led to our academic success, and I think also our organizational management of the school. The next slide is where we really want to focus the next 3 years. We often get asked the question, is this partnership worth it? What is the benefit to the community? Can this partnership be implemented in other places? And I would say that, this particular program for East was designed for East based on our preliminary analysis and data analysis of what the school was. And remember, 99% of the kids were not proficient in reading or in math, and so we chose to focus our work on the curriculum development for that school. Other schools that may already have a robust curriculum or robust curricular structure may not need that intervention. So for this to be a replicated model, I would say to anyone the answer is no, because it was created based on what we knew about East. So the first step in school reform and transformation is to know the context and the environment that you're trying to serve. We spent a year doing that for the East EPO. And so as we get to know our schools better, we'll be able to help target some of the interventions that are required and necessary for schools to be successful. And again, just a reminder that when you see the administrative lines having an increase, a significant increase, it's because I took the funds and I consolidated them, and I want to just reiterate, these are not new funds. These are funds that are within our budget that I wanted to target and be better able to track the academic inputs and investments within our school community so we can share those more broadly. And that concludes my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Nelms. Dr. Myers-Smalls?
Thank you. Good evening, President Elliott, Vice President LeBron, to all of our commissioners, to Commissioner Patterson, who's viewing online, and to our staff and Rochester City School District community. Tonight, CFO Carlene Pierce, and I will be presenting the proposed 22-23 budget for the Rochester City School District. If you'll go to the next slide. Our agenda is as follows. We are going to provide just a few highlights of the 22-23 proposed budget. We'll also speak to the alignment of the budget to the academic and the fiscal improvement plans that guide our work, key expansions to the instructional program, key assumptions regarding revenue and expenditures, and CFO Pierce will be providing information on those slides. The use of our federal funds, as Dr. Nelms mentioned, specific to ARP and CRSA, and then a 5-year budget forecast, our plans as it relates to long-term fiscal stability. So as far as highlights, the district does continue to align the budget to not only, if you'll go to the next slide, to the strategic plan, the academic and fiscal plans, the corrective action plans for bilingual education and special education, and the consent decree, which has specific expectations for the district. Our budget reflects a commitment based on those plans to the following budget priorities. And just as a reminder, we've been so focused on just ensuring, because we've had budget woes over the past several years, we've really been able to shift our focus, first under the leadership of Dr. Morris and now under Dr. Black, to really focus on instruction. And that's something that most districts do focus on, and we've been able to do that with more fidelity. So our budget priorities are delivering high-quality instruction, social, emotional, wellness and health, as well as additional supports for our English language learners, as well as our students with disabilities. Our general fund proposed budget is just a little under $862 million, which represents a 2.6 increase from the fiscal year 21-22. Right now, we have a reliance upon appropriated fund balance of $30 million. It was reduced by 10%. Our team has been working to further reduce that, and we'll speak on our last slide a little bit about the work that we're doing to move in that direction. And additionally, all funds, with the exception of CURSA and ARP, increased by 2.1% to a little over $1 million. CFO Pierce will briefly outline specific alignment of our budget to the fiscal plan.
Thank you. Good evening, everyone. As the superintendent had stated, we do have three major initiatives that are in alignment with the financial plan, and those are listed on this slide. The first is one that you've been hearing much about, and that is the integration of our current PeopleSoft financial system and HR system over to the Oracle Cloud. We do anticipate that that integration will occur during the 23-24 school year. The next item down is the upgrading of our special education system. And that particular system we do plan to bring up and have it go live during 22-23. That is in direct alignment then with our third initiative, which is Medicaid reimbursement. Back pre-COVID, our revenue in that area was closer to the $2 million mark. Once we were impacted by COVID, that revenue dropped to approximately $1.4 million. We're currently budgeting that level to be $1.5 million within the 22-23 budget. The system upgrade for special education will allow us to enhance our revenue intake, if you will, identifying the needs of our children more readily. It's live data that we'll be working with, so that will help us with our Medicaid reimbursement efforts.
Now I'll speak to the alignment to the academic plan, and you can see it is very robust, some of the things that are found in our budget that relate to the academic plan. So first and foremost, just increase of the appropriations relative to instructional materials that are specifically aligned to curricular needs and instructional programs. Adoption of K-8 district-wide instructional resources to support English language arts, or ELA, and mathematics. And as we know, proficiency for our scholars in grades 3 through 8 in those areas, we are not pleased with where students are, and so these materials help us to support our scholars as we help to improve the proficiency for particularly scholars in 3 through 8, but certainly all students, additionally students in K2. We're increasing the assessment resources, and you've heard Dr. Black come before you for the past couple of months to outline what that looks like and how that plays out across the district and across each school. We also are directly allocating resources to address school accountability. The Board of Education is very well aware of our schools that are in receivership, and we made shifts with our chiefs to have more of a support and monitoring of those schools, but we also have multiple schools in CSI, or comprehensive support, as well as TSI, targeted support. We included the expansion of special subject teachers to ensure as students were returning to school in person, that they had those additional supports and could have access to courses and extracurriculars. Increasing parent engagement efforts through the restructuring of the Department of the Office of Parent Engagement. Increased support for expanding bilingual programming for target languages, and then identifying staffing as well as resources to ensure high-quality documentation and adherence to compliance regulations. And that connects right back to our corrective action plans, both for bilingual and special education, as well as the consent decree. If we speak to the instructional highlights, I just want to provide some context, if you'll go to the next slide, how we whittled down to our budget priorities. And these are not foreign to anyone sitting in this room or listening. It should not be. Dr. Black has been adamant about the following three tenets as it relates to our Department of Teaching and Learning. Every child deserves to engage with grade-level content every day, and students must engage with high-quality, culturally responsive experiences where they are affirmed, seen, and valued. Number two, the Rochester City School District has an obligation to provide an equitable experience to every student across the district, regardless of where they live. And thirdly, each content area must be fortified to assist students to be successful in their courses, take the highest level, and achieve high levels of proficiency on state and local assessments. And certainly embedded in that is we are continuing to invest in resources so that our scholars are taking higher level courses, which we know correlates to ensuring that they're college, career, and civic ready. So as you take those three tenets or guideposts in the Department of Teaching and Learning, that formed the basis for our budget priorities for the 2022-2023 budget process. High quality instruction, students with disabilities and English language learners, and social emotional wellness and health. So as we talk about the specific instructional highlights in those three areas, if you'll go to the next slide, let's just talk a little bit about high quality instruction. And this information is further detailed in not only the budget brief, but also the budget book. But $75.2 million, of which just a little under $20 million, is from the general fund, which does include ARP and CURSA. And I just want to pause here for just a moment and talk about the concept that we've been applying. It's a blending and braiding where we are ensuring that we are working hard to ensure that we maximize both general fund as well as ARP and CURSA funds. So we're adding capacity to the Teaching and Learning Department. And I spoke about English language, arts, and mathematics support, not only for unfinished learning, because we know that that is something that has occurred in our district, but also to ensure that students can accelerate in particular courses. And that connects to our academic planning. You can see that noted there. We have resource allocation to improve accountability relative to receivership, CSI, and TSI, and certainly fortification of the academic departments. When we speak about students with disabilities and English language learners, you can see that the budget for 2023, which is proposed, $73.6 million, of which $67.6 million is from the general fund. Additional staffing focused on reducing case management ratios, improved program outcomes, and the quality and timeliness of documentation, as well as the adherence to local, state, and federal expectations. Again, just reiterating, the Rochester City School District has CAPs, corrective action plans for bilingual and special ed, and consent decrees. So we are working to ensure that our resources in this particular area ensure that we are meeting the expectations or the expectation of the CAPs and the consent decree, and that we can move forward positively to ensure that we're fulfilling that and we don't have those corrective action plans. And then finally, social emotional wellness, $7.8 million of the budget is focused towards social emotional wellness and health, of which $8.5 comes from the general fund. Additional social workers, increased capacity for the Rock Restorative team, increases in school health services, and increased parent engagement. And we spoke about restructuring the department. Carlene, our CFO, will speak to the next few slides about revenues, appropriated fund balance, appropriations, including assumptions.
Thank you. As Superintendent Dr. Myers-Small had stated, this is the same exact budget that we had presented to you last week in the budget brief, and it's the same exact budget that we had presented to SED yesterday. We did hear your feedback last week, and we did hear SED's feedback clearly yesterday as well. So with that said, please understand that this is a budget under construction, if you will. There's much work that needs to be done on it. We realize that. And we are doing everything within our abilities to make sure that this is the best budget that we can deliver to the children of our CSD. So once again, I would just like to make you aware of how dependent our district is upon state aid, and that is shown on this particular graph. As we move on, you will see the revenue key assumptions. Again, all of these assumptions were presented to you in the budget brief. You will see that we are referencing the foundation aid increase, the removal of the CARES Act money, and again, you may remember that the CARES Act money, when it first came to us, the directive was to include that money within the general fund as opposed to the special aid fund. SRSA and ARP money has been designated to be placed within special aid, so now it is separate and distinct from the general fund, but that was not the case when CARES was allocated to us. So in the 22-23 budget, you will see the removal of the CARES money in as a revenue into that budget. Our interfund revenue will actually be increasing, and that's because we are able to allocate certain expenditures within the general fund that can be reimbursed by money coming in from the special aid fund to support the grants. And again, that is primarily tied back into SRSA and ARP grant funds. In August of 22, we are going to be converting some bands to bonds, and that will equate to some revenue coming back into the general fund. We have $56 million in bands that will be converted, and so that will be accounted for in the 22-23 budget in the form of premiums on obligations. We have, as well in this particular budget, the fact that we've discussed this matter with you, that we have the appropriated fund balance being used in the amount of $30 million to balance the budget. Again, we've heard you loud and clear that we need to do some work on that, and we certainly are taking on that effort and working to reduce that amount. We would like you to know, too, that with regard to the revenue assumptions, as with any budget in any given budget year, our preliminary numbers are based upon the executive budget run, and so now we have to wait for the legislative runs to be approved so we can tighten down our revenue dollar amounts. And so within your presentation tonight, you have the revenues as they stand with the executive run, and we will be combing through those revenues. Again, once the legislative runs are approved and delivered to us, we will update this slide. With regard to appropriations, appropriations is another term for expenditures. Every month you may recall that we have an appropriations report that we review, appropriation status report. So again, how are we expending our money? What you'll see on this particular visual is again that the greatest portion of our expenditures going out the door would be in employee compensation and benefits, with contractual vendors coming in a very a close second to those employee compensation expenditures. When you take a look at, again, the key assumptions for the expenditures, or again, appropriations within the 22-23 budget, you will find that as we deliver to you in the budget brief, we are estimating a $1.8 million increase in charter schools because of the 3 new schools that are opening in 22-23, as well as the schools that are in existence that are expanding their seats within their schools as approved by either SUNY or the Board of Regents. We do have increases being recognized as well for utilities. We are all feeling that pressure right now in our own personal home budgets. We will feel it here at the district as well. And we have to remember, too, that included within that number will be the bringing up, if you will, the 4 different schools that we had involved with FMP underneath renovations. We have 4 schools coming back online, so that added to our utility expenditures as well. Unemployment insurance will be increasing within the general fund, and that is because in the last couple of years as it related to COVID, but predominantly in the year 21, we were able to shift some of the unemployment expenditures to our school lunch fund as well as to the special aid fund. That is no longer the case. So now the unemployment insurance will appear to be increasing, but it's truly increasing as a reallocation back into the general fund. And let's see here. The next slide is going to just be, again, a snapshot of where things stand as of today. Again, we know for certain that this slide will be changing. We heard you loud and clear with regard to our expenditures, and so there will be changes forthcoming with our expenditures and with the slide.
Before we go into talking about just addressing structural deficit and some of the longer-term planning, we do want to speak just briefly to federal funds, which include both CRSA and ARP. This slide serves as a reminder of the 11 initiatives that the CRSA funds are supporting. And these initiatives support 3 of the larger relief fund priorities identified through our rigorous district planning process over the past several months. They include rigorous academics and instruction, leadership and instructional capacity, and district-wide infrastructure. If you look at CRSA initiatives by year, this is the proposed, if you'll go to the next slide, the proposed spending plan of CRSA, and it represents a budget that the New York State Department of Education approved within the FS10 that was submitted for round 1 and the FS10A that was submitted for round 2. Our expenses in CRSA to date are approximately $6.2 million, of which we've been reimbursed for $2.5 million. We submitted additional information in early March in the amount of approximately $3.7 million. We are closely monitoring the spend down on this grant and anticipate adjustments to the spending plan upon the completion of an amendment, which we anticipate to put forward in mid-April of 2022. And I know the grants team has been working over the past several months, if you just go back to that for a moment. And they had a meeting yesterday to review our CRSA spending, and will be putting forth additional recommendations that will be available for review for myself, Dr. Jallo, and the deputies. If you can go now to the next slide. So just a few of the CRSA highlights. Remember, we used a lot of this money for direct COVID relief supports to schools. So there is temporary staffing that is in this because it's related to COVID, and that applies again for some substitute teachers, for paraprofessionals, and special staffing where we made some of those positions whole. Additionally, we want to ensure that we speak about the replacement of the Oracle Business Enterprise System. That is a huge, huge, huge transition that we are making that really will enable us to tighten up our systems and structures, and it will make the way that we do business in the Rochester City School District much more streamlined and easier. And so it is very significant work, and that's through our CRSA funds. If we shift to ARP funding priorities, they're represented on this next graph. Subsequent spend down of ARP has occurred, and teams are in the process of building RFPs for contracts to support this work. And we've also been working on other business processes so we can access the funds and move forward with hiring processes. We're really pleased to share that several large-scale activities will be supported with ARP funds in 2022. For example, we've proposed an extremely robust summer school program that addresses student need, from recovery to intervention to enrichment and acceleration. Dr. Black has been really adamant about the importance of both the remediation and the unfinished learning support, as well as acceleration and enrichment. We are also excited to share, and Dr. Nelms alluded to this a little bit in his presentation, around the direct support that we've been able to provide to each one of our schools, which includes participatory budgeting, which will allow the schools to work with their school communities and varied stakeholders. And on the next slide, you can see the ARP priorities by year. Again, this shows each year how we plan to spend the funds as proposed in ARP. And the spend down started in late January after our ARP proposals were approved by the New York State Department of Education. And to date, we have recorded approximately a little over $50,000. As with CURSA, adjustments will be made as spend down as we review that, and on the quarterly basis, we will be coming forward to review information with varied stakeholders. We've already conducted a presentation with the executive school-based planning team. We'll have another presentation. We'll have our stakeholder meetings, and then the goal is to ensure that this information is trickled down to each one of the schools so it can be spoken to and understood in a very transparent manner, which means we'll be updating information on the website as well. Our last slide speaks to our 5-year budget forecast and plans for long-term fiscal stability. As CFO Pierce stated, we did hear loud and clear, both from the Board of Education as well as NYSED, we need to certainly take a look at our use of appropriated fund balance, but also to ensure that we have long-term fiscal stability in the Rochester City School District and make sure that our fiscal outlook is bright. So when we've been meeting over the past several weeks, and a big ticket item certainly is the reconciliation of substitute teacher costs. We had a little bit of a conversation recently at a board meeting that spoke to concerns around vacancies, substitute teachers, long-term substitute costs. So under the leadership of Dr. Miller in OHC, Office of Human Capital, and CFO Pierce in the Finance Department, they've been working to reconcile this particular area, and we will be coming forward with what we believe to be a plan where we can make some reductions here. We have some transportation opportunities as we continue, and I know the managed choice policy was reviewed again yesterday with Dr. Morris and Commissioner Powell. So looking at managed choice as well as transportation as it relates to managed choice, as well as purchasing buses versus leasing. We're moving forward in that direction. We will be coming back again with school closures and mergers and recommendations for that process, and that will happen as we shift into phase 3 of facility modernization. And as we previously outlined, that process will run from the spring to the summer to the fall with final decisions, and we'll have certainly significant input not only from the board, from our community, but also from the New York State Department of Education. We know that the Board of Education is also very interested in certainly community schools and neighborhood schools. There are touch points and overlap between the two, but we know that they are separate and have unique characteristics of each. We also know that Commissioner Rosa today at the Big 5 stakeholder meeting spoke about community schools. And so once we make some decisions relative to school closures, that ties into neighborhood schools, community schools. And so we'll have some additional information as we move forward that process, but including that in our long-term plan. We also have been working on the repurposing of buildings and space to outside entities. That information is in the documents we provided to you last week. We also know we have a charter school hearing on Thursday. We have 3 new schools, as CFO Pierce mentioned, that will be starting in the fall of 2022. So we have significant work and need to put significant time and attention to charter school, and I always have to say this slowly because it's alliteration: recruitment, recoupment, and reconciliation. And so we need to apply a full court press relative to getting our scholars back from charter schools, so we know that we need to put resources, time, and attention to doing that. But on the reconciliation side, we'll be able to really more closely monitor through CFO Pierce's office with a dedicated staff to make sure that the reconciliation of data, the enrollments of scholars in charter schools, that we really have close monitoring on that piece. And then this is a strategy rather than a particular suggestion, but we really have to continue the culture of disciplined spending and monitoring how we move in that way. CFO Pierce is just going to give a little more information relative to the financial aspects and what how this potentially can play out over the next 5 years.
Thank you. We'll start back up at the top. And so again, with the reduction in and reconciliation of substitute teacher codes, we would be able to recognize a savings there. We don't know exactly what that dollar amount would be. We're still working on those calculations, but we would recognize that savings in the 22-23 school year. With regard to transportation opportunities that the superintendent had referenced, we do know that we will be switching from leasing our buses to purchasing our buses. That will save us $3 million over the course of 10 years. So, of course, we will be incorporating that savings back into our long-range plan each year. We will have also the opportunity to save additional money should we move away from the managed choice. Just to put a dollar amount on that for you, that would be approximately would result in the reduction of 10 bus runs. That would be able to reduce our fleet from 73 down to 59 buses, which would result in a savings of $540,000 per year. So again, we're trying to put this in alignment not only with the dollar amount, but then what year it would start with regard to the savings. If that action was taken by the board, that savings could start as early as 22-23, so this current fiscal year. With regard to the closures of schools or mergings of schools, if we did close the schools and the board decided that that was an action that they wanted to take, you could estimate an additional $350,000 per year in savings per building. That is the dollar amount, and both of these dollar amounts, obviously, with regard to transportation and with regard to facilities, were provided to us by Chief Schmidt. I do want to give him credit for the numbers as well as for bringing these ideas forward and then allowing us to share those with you. This particular effort, because it takes time to go through the studies, as we all know, as we can recall it very recently, but we could commence with those savings in 23-24. So again, it's $350,000 per building, so each building that would be returned to the city, it would be 350 times the number of buildings returned. With regard to the alignment with the neighborhood schools initiative, that would be to be determined. If we do not have a dollar amount that we can allocate to that at this point in time, that we could give you and stand behind it. As we take a look at repurposing buildings, another wonderful opportunity where we could lease out our facilities to outside entities or even charter schools. Being part of those outside entities, we believe that that would bring in an additional $800,000 per year. That could commence as early as 23-24 should the board decide to take that route. Lastly, with regard to the charter schools, again, we do not know the amount this year that we will be charging in tuition. That amount comes a little bit later from the state. But easily, if we were looking to bring back 100 students per year, that amount for this particular school year, if we embrace this initiative with Ernst, just an absolute desire to have this done this year at 100 students per year, we could recognize anywhere from 1.3 to 1.4 million for those children to come back into the district. So again, if we brought only 100 children back in 22-23, it would be somewhere between 1.3, 1.4 million, depending on the tuition costs we'd be paying out this year. So if you just look at 100 students every year for the next 5 years, we could bring that back in as revenue in our long-range plan. I thank you for your time.
So with that, that's our overview of the proposed 22-23 budget. It is proposed and still in draft. Our team continues to work, again, on looking at reducing appropriated fund balance and adding additional information to tighten up our long-range plan. Tonight, you will be receiving the proposed budget book, that shouldn't say brief, it should say book, as well as the draft of the capital improvement project. Or did you get that last week? Did you get the CIP? Yeah, we got the CIP. Okay, so you'll have the budget book. And then we also, if you would just put on screen just the budget dates, because we want to make sure that we constantly are uplifting that as we continue to move forward. We'll be busy the rest of this month, throughout the month of April, where we finalize in May. And with that, Vice President LeBron, that concludes the Rochester City School District 22-23 proposed budget.
Thank you. The only question I just have is in regards to the update on Section 5. I know that we made a request that
Yes.
So if you want to talk about that real quick.
Sure. So the information was already prepared, and we had that information, but that was something that previously was not included, but is based on what had been agreed upon by the board. But last Friday, the request was made and it was voted on favorably, so that now when you get your budget book, Section 5, which has detailed information relative to central office, which includes superintendent, Board of Education, that information is now included.
Section 5 is included in the draft budget book right now?
It is not, no.
Oh, I'm
Okay.
sorry.
No, it's okay.
I'm sorry.
It's okay.
I wanted a date. I'm
Right.
sorry. Because yes.
Yes, we're moving towards getting that. You'll have that in another 10 days, 10 to 14 days.
Well, let me just say, the board, when we voted, it was decided that we would get an actual date tonight. Remember, like, there wasn't, you couldn't give us a date Friday, so we just want to have an understanding of a date of when the board will receive that section.
Sure.
Because then Kali and I will work to ensure that it's the last deliberation and update the
Yes.
calendar. And so we can get that date. Thank you.
Our best estimate would be April 20th to get the information to you in the format we believe that would be acceptable to you. So I'd like to review that with you to make sure that, again, we are meeting your expectations and we won't delay any longer.
But Vice
President.
President LeBron,
Yeah.
does that date impact our dates for our deliberation?
I think it
April
potentially.
20th. April 20th does allow for about 7 days of review before the April 27th last submission of questions from board members. It also is before the May 5th budget deliberation session. So April 20th, it does allow 7 days before April 27th to submit the last round of questions, and then a little bit less than 2 weeks to do the deliberation session on that section.
So we're going to expect to have it April 20th.
20th,
Yeah,
correct.
we're going to expect to have it April 20th. Okay, all right, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you to our CFO, Carlene Pierce, for your presentation. Thank you to Dr. Sean Nelms, and thank you to Dr. Leslie Myers-Smalls for your presentation. That actually concludes this special meeting. I'm going to turn it over to President Elliott. She's going to call for a motion.
Yeah, thank you, Vice President. I'm going to ask for a motion for executive session for the purpose of discussing matters leading to the appointment or employment of a particular person and a student matter with
Hold on 1 second. I'm so sorry. Your mic wasn't on. Would you mind repeating?
I'm asking for a motion to go into an executive session for the purpose of discussing matters leading to the appointment or employment of a particular person and a student matter that is confidential by virtue of federal or state law.
So moved.
Can I get a second? Second. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye, thank you. We're going into executive session. And good night, everybody.